My dad showed up at my door and said your brother starts college next year. Give him this apartment so he can get used to it. So I responded, or you could kick him out like you did to me and let him figure it out himself. I remember asking if this was a joke, my voice cracking like I was still 14, not technically a legal adult. But he didn't blink, just pointed to the bag already packed and said I had 10 minutes before he changed the locks. That was how I left home, not with a celebration, but with a cheap gym bag, $60 in my pocket, and no clue where I'd sleep that night. At the time, I had just graduated high school 3 days prior. I wasn't some rebellious teen. I wasn't getting into trouble. No drugs, no skipping class, no fighting. I had a part-time job at the local gas station, a 3.7 GPA, and a dream of maybe getting into community college if I could afford it. But none of that seemed to matter. The truth is, I'd always known I was the spare. My younger brother Nathan was the golden child. Even as a kid, I used to joke that he must have had a halo tucked somewhere in his closet. Straight A's, sure, but so did I. But when he did it, it was brilliant. When I did it was expected. He'd crash my bike and get a replacement the next day. I'd break a shoelace and get blamed for not taking care of my things. Nathan was 2 years younger, but they treated him like the heir to a throne I didn't know existed. He got braces and tennis lessons. I got used sneakers and silence. Every time I asked why things were so different between us, my dad would say, "Don't be dramatic, Alex. Life's not fair." And that was the end of the conversation always. I learned early not to push too hard. So I kept my head down, worked my shifts, did my homework, and told myself that once I turned 18, I'd leave on my own terms. But I guess they beat me to it. The first week out of that house was brutal. I couch hopped with friends until one of their parents got uncomfortable. I slept in the break room at work one night when it was raining too hard to walk the streets. Eventually, I found a dingy room in a shared house with 3 strangers, one of whom sold weed out of the living room, another who blasted music at 3 a.m., and the third who barely spoke English but always smiled and offered me instant noodles. That man Shun was more family than my parents had ever been. It took me 4 years to get on my feet. I worked every job I could: cashier, delivery driver, late-night janitor at a mall where the air always smelled like expired popcorn. I studied on breaks, took online classes, and eventually earned a degree in IT. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No help from my parents, no trust fund, no secret savings account. Just me, a busted laptop, and sheer stubbornness. By the time I hit 26, I was living in a clean 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood. I had a car that ran a job that paid well, and for the first time in my life, a sense of peace. Not happiness, exactly. That came later. But peace. I didn't think about my family much. I didn't visit, didn't call. I wasn't bitter, at least not consciously. I just figured if I wasn't good enough for them, then I sure as hell wasn't going to beg now. And then one Sunday morning, everything shifted again. It started with a knock. I was in sweats, just about to start some laundry, when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks, too firm to be friendly. I peeked through the peephole and froze. My mom. Behind her, slightly out of view, was my dad, arms crossed in that same posture I remembered from the day they kicked me out. My first thought wasn't, why are they here? It was, how do they even know where I live? I opened the door but didn't step aside. Alex? My mom started all breathy and wide-eyed like this was some long-lost reunion. You look grown. I am grown, I replied flatly. What do you want? My dad cut in, no small talk. We need to talk. Can we come in? I stared at them for a long second. I didn't say yes. I just stepped aside. They sat on my couch like it was theirs. My mom looked around like she was inspecting the place for dust. My dad remained standing, hands on his hips. The silence was thick. We've had a rough few years, my mom finally said, clasping her hands in her lap. And your brother? Well, he's in a bit of a bind. I felt something cold twist in my stomach. Of course this was about Nathan. What kind of bind, I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He got laid off, she said gently, like I was supposed to feel sorry. And his fiancée left him, took the car. He's struggling. I waited. We thought my dad said that since you're doing well now and since you have this place, maybe it's time to come together as a family. I raised an eyebrow. Come together how? My mom glanced at my dad before answering. We think it would make sense for Nathan to move in here just temporarily until he gets back on his feet. There was a moment of stunned silence. I almost laughed. Almost. You're joking, I said. No, my dad replied firmly. You've got space. It's the least you can do. Family comes first. Those 3 words made something snap in me. Family comes first. The same family that tossed me out like garbage. The same family that let me go hungry while they remodeled Nathan's room into a study space after I left. Let me get this straight, I said slowly, trying not to raise my voice. You threw me out on my 18th birthday with no warning, no support, and now you're asking me to house Nathan because family comes first. My mom looked uncomfortable. We made mistakes. Mistakes, I interrupted. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Alex, my dad said, stepping forward like he was still in control of this situation. He's your brother. He needs you. You don't turn your back on family. I stood up. You did. The room went quiet again. Look, my mom tried to soften her tone. He's been through a lot. He's not like you. He doesn't handle hardship well. He's always been sensitive. And I wasn't, I said, incredulous. I just didn't have the luxury of falling apart. It was clear they weren't getting it or didn't want to. My dad kept pressing, tossing out reasons, guilt comparisons. He even said something about how I'd built this life off the back of their tough love. I almost choked. That wasn't tough love. That was abandonment, plain and simple. They left that day without an answer, but I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it in my gut. They weren't going to let this go, not with Nathan in the picture. And I had no idea just how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. But I was no longer the scared 18-year-old they left behind. And this time, I had something to lose and something to protect. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was just beginning. They didn't call for a few days after that visit. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd taken a hint and backed off. I even started to let it go, convincing myself that their ridiculous request was just a one-time shot at manipulation. But by the following weekend, I knew I'd underestimated them. It started with a voicemail from Nathan. I hadn't heard his voice in years, and I barely recognized it at first. He sounded tired, scratchy, and oddly rehearsed, like he was trying to sound pitiful on purpose. Hey, Alex, Mom and Dad told me they came to see you. I know it's a lot to ask, man, but I'm kind of out of options right now. I lost my job and my place, and I've been crashing at a friend's, but it's not working out. I could use your help just until I get back on my feet. Please call me. I didn't call him back. That wasn't me being cold-hearted. That was self-preservation. I knew how this would go. Nathan had always been able to coast on his charm. He had this disarming way of acting helpless, like he was a puppy who'd wandered into traffic. And people, especially our parents, would rush to save him. But not me. Not this time. I had scars they never even noticed. And I wasn't going to pretend they didn't exist just because Nathan was finally dealing with the consequences of his own life choices. Still, that voicemail started gnawing at me. Not guilt, more like dread, because if Nathan was reaching out, that meant my parents had activated the next phase of their plan. And I wasn't wrong. 3 days later, I came home from work and found my dad's car parked outside my apartment building. My stomach sank. He was standing by the door, arms crossed, same posture, same scowl. When I approached, he didn't move, just said, "We need to talk." I didn't bother inviting him in. "We've been patient," he said, like I was a rebellious child refusing to eat my vegetables. "But you're being selfish." I laughed. I actually laughed. Selfish. You think I'm being selfish. You've got a stable life now. Nathan doesn't. You don't think your brother deserves a chance too? What he deserves, I said, has nothing to do with me. He stepped closer. You're part of this family, whether you like it or not. No, I replied, staring him down. You made sure I wasn't. He didn't like that. His jaw tightened, and I saw a flash of anger in his eyes. Not rage, but something worse. Entitlement, like he believed deep down that everything I had was somehow his to bargain with. He didn't yell, he just said, "You'll regret this," and walked off. 2 days after that, I started getting unexpected texts from extended family. Cousins and aunt I hadn't heard from in years, even a random Facebook message from someone who claimed to be a family friend. All of them saying some version of the same thing. It's not right to turn your back on family. Nathan's struggling. He needs support. You're doing well. Can't you help just a little? One cousin even said, "Wow, didn't realize success made you so heartless." It was coordinated. My parents had clearly spun a story, probably one where I was living like royalty in a mansion while poor Nathan was sleeping in gutters. The irony was my apartment was modest at best, but that didn't matter. The narrative had been set, and I was now the villain. I could have fought back. I could have told everyone what really happened when I turned 18, how I was thrown out like trash, but a part of me didn't want to play their game. I'd spent too many years letting their narrative shape my life. I wasn't going to beg people to believe me. That was the beginning of the slow unraveling. Nathan started showing up in person. First it was the parking lot, then the lobby, then once he was waiting outside my door, always with that same hangdog expression, like he was just too beaten down to even speak above a whisper. "I'm not here to fight," he said one evening, hands in his pockets. I just need help. I'm not the one you should be asking, I replied, trying not to slam the door in his face. But you're the only one who can. That line stuck with me not because it was true, but because he believed it. My parents had conditioned him to see me not as a brother, but as a safety net. And now that they'd run out of rope, they were throwing him onto me like dead weight. Then came the real breaking point. I was at work knee-deep in a network issue when I got a call from my landlord. Not something that ever happened. I picked up worried something was wrong with the building. "Hi, Alex," he said, sounding unusually cheerful. "Just wanted to confirm you're moving out by the first, right?" I blinked. "Wait, what?" "Well, your brother stopped by this morning. Said you were moving out and transferring the lease to him. He had paperwork and everything." My heart dropped into my stomach. "No," I said slowly. "I never said that. I'm not moving out." There was a pause. "Oh, he said you asked him to handle it while you were at work." I couldn't speak. My fingers were shaking. "Don't worry," the landlord added quickly. "Nothing's changed yet. I figured I'd call to confirm just in case." I hung up and rushed home. Sure enough, when I got there, Nathan was waiting outside my door again. But this time, he had a backpack with him and a smug look on his face. "What the hell did you do?" I snapped. He had the nerve to look confused. "What do you mean?" "You told my landlord I'm moving out. Are you insane?" He shrugged. "I figured you'd come around eventually. I was just speeding things up." "By lying, by forging my name." "It's not forgery if we're family," he said. Like that made any kind of sense. "I was just trying to help." I stared at him, stunned. "Help who? You? Me? Everyone?" This back and forth is tearing the family apart. Once I'm settled in, we can fix all this. That was when I realized something. Nathan didn't see what he was doing as wrong. He honestly believed he was the victim, that he was entitled to my apartment, my life, my stability. And the scariest part, he didn't even see me as a person. I was just the next stepping stone. That night, I locked every window and door. I texted my landlord and told him under no circumstances was anyone allowed to make changes to my lease but me. I changed my locks the next morning. I even bought a small camera to put in my entryway. I didn't care if it was paranoid. I needed proof if anything else happened. And it did. The next week, I came home to find my lock scratched. Not broken, but clearly tampered with. I checked the footage. It was my father. He had tried to break in. That was it. That was the moment I stopped waiting for them to be decent. The moment I accepted, they weren't just entitled, they were dangerous. I wasn't going to defend myself anymore. I was going to prepare. And if they thought I'd sit quietly while they tried to dismantle my life piece by piece, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because this time I wasn't alone. And I wasn't playing defense anymore. Now I was planning something they would never see coming. When I watched that footage, my father trying to pick my lock like some second-rate criminal, I didn't feel fear. Not at first. I felt cold, numb. There was this strange, delayed silence in my brain, like my mind was buffering what I'd just seen. He didn't even wear gloves, no mask. Just a baseball cap and a jacket I recognized from my childhood, like he'd just come from the grocery store and decided to casually commit a felony on his way home. The only reason he didn't get in was because I'd changed the lock that morning. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I was scared. Not because I thought they'd hurt me physically, though at that point I wasn't ruling anything out, but because I'd finally accepted what I'd been denying since I was 18. They didn't love me. Not really. Maybe they loved the idea of me, the version that quietly disappeared, didn't cause trouble, didn't get in Nathan's way. But me, the version who survived without them, who dared to say no. That person was a threat, an obstacle, and obstacles got moved. I sent the footage to my landlord, immediately told him I was considering filing a police report. He was sympathetic, a little stunned, but also nervous. Said if I felt unsafe, maybe I should think about moving. I knew he meant well, but I couldn't help feeling like I was being punished for my father's actions. Again, the next few weeks were a blur. I didn't sleep well. Every time I passed a window, I checked for shadows. I stopped wearing headphones on my way home. I even started carrying pepper spray, and I hated that. Hated what it meant. That I wasn't safe not from strangers, but from my own family. That's what broke me. It wasn't the messages from extended relatives. It wasn't Nathan's fake lease paperwork. It wasn't even my father trying to break in. It was the realization that if something had happened, if I hadn't changed that lock, if I had come home 10 minutes earlier, there would be no justice, no support. No one in my family would have believed me. In fact, they probably would have blamed me for overreacting. Again, that's when I hit bottom. I called in sick for the first time in years. Didn't leave the apartment for 3 straight days. Didn't answer texts. I canceled every plan, let the dishes pile up, turned off my phone at night just so I could feel what silence felt like again. I sat on the couch replaying that video on loop until the battery drained. My own father hands shaking, eyes darting like a stranger. I remember crying once, just once during that stretch. Not loud or messy, just sitting on the bathroom floor holding a towel, feeling every ounce of strength leak out of me like air from a popped balloon. I wasn't sobbing, I wasn't even angry, I was just tired. Tired of fighting for space that should have been mine to begin with. Tired of pretending I was fine. Tired of building and rebuilding when no one ever even saw the foundation. But somewhere in that quiet, something shifted. I don't know what exactly triggered it. Maybe it was seeing how far they were willing to go, or maybe it was finally admitting how badly I'd been hurt. But for the first time in years, I stopped reacting and I started planning. First, I pulled all my security footage from the last month. I archived everything, created backups, uploaded the files to cloud storage with passwords. I documented every interaction, the voicemail, the text messages, even screenshots of Facebook comments from distant relatives, parroting the same guilt trip language. I turned my apartment into a case file. Then I started locking down my life. I changed every password, set up 2-factor authentication on every account. I called my credit card companies, placed fraud alerts on my credit profile, and even pulled my credit report just to check. Nothing suspicious yet, but I wasn't going to wait. Next, I told my boss everything. Not the whole sob story, but enough. I told him I was dealing with a family situation. There might be people trying to contact me or show up at the office. To my surprise, he was incredibly supportive. Gave me a few days off to take care of what matters, and even offered to forward any unknown callers straight to voicemail. Funny how strangers show more grace than family. I used those days to meet with a lawyer. Found her through a friend of a friend, a quiet, serious woman named Jordan who listened without flinching. I laid everything. The eviction at 18, the sudden reappearance, the manipulation, the attempted lease fraud, the break-in, the surveillance footage, the paper trail. She didn't interrupt. She didn't act shocked. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "You have grounds for a restraining order and maybe more depending on how far this goes." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. That conversation sparked something in me I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. Control. Not revenge, not yet, but power. And that was enough to start healing. In the following months, I shifted my focus inward. I enrolled in a certification course I'd been putting off for years. Something about cloud infrastructure and data security. Boring to most, but to me it was a ladder. Every night I came home, made dinner, and studied. No distractions, no drama, just progress. I started seeing a therapist too. Just once a week at first, then twice. Her name was Elena, and she didn't coddle me. She called out my avoidance. She gently pointed out my patterns. She helped me realize I wasn't broken. I'd just been surviving on autopilot for so long, I didn't know how to feel safe even when I was safe. One session I told her I didn't think I'd ever fully trust anyone again. She said, "Maybe you don't have to. Maybe it's not about trusting everyone, just learning how to trust yourself, not to let them get too close." That stuck with me. Over time, I made new friends, real ones. People who didn't want anything from me. I joined a running group, which if you knew me, would sound hilarious. And somehow sweating alongside strangers made me feel human again. I even started dating casually, nothing serious. But I smiled more, laughed even. Sometimes I caught myself walking around my apartment just content. I hadn't felt that in a decade. But that peace came with clarity. Because even though I was rebuilding piece by piece, breath by breath, I hadn't forgotten. They were still out there, still lying, still twisting my story into something unrecognizable. And while I didn't want to live in the past, I also wasn't about to let it rewrite itself without a fight. Especially because of what came next. It started with a letter, not a text, not a knock. A formal letter mailed to my apartment. Handwritten return address, no stamp, just slipped into my mailbox. It was from my mother. I stared at the envelope for 10 full minutes before opening it. The letter was 3 pages long, neat handwriting. The same loopy cursive she used to write on birthday cards back when she still remembered to buy them. It started off with the usual, "We miss you. We never meant to hurt you." Things were hard back then. Then it shifted. She wrote that Nathan was going through a deep depression and had begun making serious plans to fix his life. She said they wanted to transfer the family home to him, to give him a fresh start, but that some paperwork still had my name listed as an heir from years ago, when my grandfather left a small inheritance to me and Nathan jointly. She asked me to sign a few things, said it was just a formality, said it was just paperwork. I folded the letter, set it on the table, and sat there for a long time. It wasn't just about the apartment anymore. They were after something bigger now, something tied to family property inheritance land, things I didn't even know I had a legal tie to. But they knew. They always knew. And they'd kept quiet until they needed something, until he needed something. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel broken. I felt focused. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about setting the record straight, legally, financially, and emotionally. And for the first time in my life, I was going to write my own ending. But first, I had to gather every piece of the puzzle they thought I'd forgotten. And once it was all in place, they'd finally understand what it felt like to be on the outside looking in. By the time I finished reading my mother's letter for the third time, I wasn't just suspicious, I was certain. They were trying to erase me. Not metaphorically, legally, quietly, permanently. The wording wasn't angry or threatening. That's what made it worse. It was sanitized, coded in that fake kindness they used to use when I was a kid, asking why Nathan got dessert and I didn't. It's not about fairness, sweetie. It's about what's best for everyone. Only this time, it wasn't about dessert. It was about the family home, a house I hadn't thought about in years. I don't know if you've ever had to dig through the legal graveyard of your own childhood, but it's a strange experience. I started by emailing Jordan, my lawyer, and sent her the letter. Her reply came within the hour. If they're asking you to sign anything related to your grandfather's will, don't. Not yet. Let's pull the documents first and see what they're trying to override. That was the spark. She filed a request for the original estate documentation the next morning. While we waited, I started doing what I do best, documenting. I created a digital folder titled Operation Cleanup because humor helped keep the fury from boiling over. I went through every piece of communication, texts, voicemails, letters, and created a timeline. I also started writing a personal statement just to keep my thoughts in order. That process, it was unexpectedly cathartic. Writing everything down, I started noticing things I'd missed in the moment, like how each reaching out moment from my family had a purpose. Not connection, not reconciliation, just extraction. They only ever contacted me when they needed something. The groceries when I was 14, and Dad forgot his wallet that turned into a "you owe us for raising you" argument by dinner. The time I gave Nathan my laptop when his broke in high school turned into him telling everyone I was so generous while our parents acted like it was a birthday gift they gave him. Even now, after a decade of silence, they hadn't come back to apologize. They came back with a plan. Well, now I had one too. 2 days later, Jordan called. "I've got something," she said, her voice low even though I was on speaker in my own apartment. "The inheritance." "Yep, your grandfather left a joint trust split 50-50 between you and Nathan. But here's the thing. The house your parents live in, it was never theirs to keep. It was bought under that trust, and your grandfather's instructions were explicit." "What kind of instructions?" I asked, heart hammering. "If the property is sold, proceeds must be split evenly. If it's kept, both heirs must consent to any transfer of title. They can't sign it over to Nathan without your permission." I sat in stunned silence. They'd been living there for over a decade. They must have known or at least suspected, which meant this whole time they were hoping I'd either never find out or be naive enough to sign it away without asking questions. Jordan continued, "If you want, we can put a formal block on any attempts to transfer ownership, but it might alert them that, you know." "No," I said slowly. "Let them think I'm still considering it. I want them to get comfortable." She was quiet for a second. "Alex, are you planning something?" "I'm planning to make sure they never try this again." The setup took weeks. Step 1 was information. I requested property tax records, deed history, and every document tied to the trust. Jordan handled most of the legal side, but I wanted to understand it. The more I read, the angrier I got. They'd manipulated loopholes, skirted co-ownership clauses, and basically lived off my inheritance while pretending it was their God-given right. Even their renovation permits listed Nathan's name as future beneficiary. Step 2 was silence. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't call. I didn't push back. And that drove them nuts. A week later, I got a follow-up note from my mom, shorter, more emotional, filled with underlined words like family and unity and legacy. There was even a little line at the end that made me laugh out loud. "We hope you're not letting old wounds cloud your judgment." Cloud my judgment. They made me homeless on my birthday, but I stayed quiet. Let them believe I was still the hesitant, soft-spoken kid they booted at 18. Meanwhile, step 3 was already in motion. Allies. I started by calling my cousin Rachel. We weren't close growing up. She lived across the state, but we'd always gotten along. She had messaged me months ago during the family guilt campaign, but she wasn't aggressive like the others, just confused, curious. She picked up on the second ring. "Alex, hey Rach? Got a second?" That one conversation opened a floodgate. Turns out Rachel had her own issues with my parents and Nathan, especially Nathan. At a family reunion a few years back, he'd cornered her husband about investment opportunities, trying to sell him on some shady crypto project. She never trusted him since. Once I told her what was really going on, the property, the trust, the manipulation, she was furious. I knew something was off when Aunt Linda acted like they owned that house outright. I remember Grandpa always saying it was for the boys, not for Nathan. We talked for an hour. Before hanging up, she said, "Whatever you're planning, I'm in." After that, I reached out to 3 more cousins, 2 of whom had also been iced out of the family for minor offenses like dating someone not respectable or moving out of state without permission. Same story, different details. Within a week, I had a mini network of black sheep, all of them willing to back me up publicly if things went sideways. Some of them had old photos, letters, even voicemails that hinted at the trust situation, evidence that would further establish that my parents knew the terms and just chose to ignore them. But the final setup that came when I got a call from Nathan himself. I let it go to voicemail. His tone had shifted again, no longer pitiful, confident, a little smug. "Hey Alex, look, I know you're taking your time with the paperwork, but just a heads up, Mom and Dad are getting everything finalized with the lawyer. We're hoping to wrap things up this month. It'd be easier if you just signed and sent it over, but I get it. Sometimes you got to feel like you're in control, just don't take too long. Family's watching." That message was the last piece I needed. They were moving forward illegally, and they'd left a breadcrumb trail of intent in writing. Perfect. The next morning, I met Jordan at her office and outlined my final plan. We drafted a cease and desist letter to their lawyer, citing the exact clauses of the trust they were violating. But instead of sending it immediately, we waited. I wanted to time it perfectly. I knew Nathan's birthday was coming up. They always made a big deal about it, family dinner gifts, emotional speeches about his potential. If they were going to make a formal announcement about the house, that'd be the night. Jordan agreed to be on standby with the letter and injunction paperwork just in case. But I had one more card to play. A week before the birthday dinner, I made a quiet call to a local investigative journalist, someone who'd covered shady real estate deals before. I sent over the public trust documents, the family letter, and a redacted version of the voicemail, just enough to get them interested. And they were. Turns out inheritance fraud tied to elderly estates was a hot topic, especially when one sibling had been kicked out at 18 and the other was trying to force them out of their share years later. I didn't tell them everything, just enough for now, because the revenge wasn't complete yet. But the trap? It was set, and I was done playing nice. The night of Nathan's birthday dinner, I didn't sleep. Not from nerves, not from fear, from focus. Everything was ready. The documentation had been reviewed, the legal response drafted, and my phone was charged at 100%. I even set a reminder titled "Drop the Hammer" at exactly 7:30 p.m. Just in time for the big family speech I knew my father would give. Jordan was standing by with the court injunction. The journalist had already emailed me twice asking if I had a comment to include in their final draft, which was set to go live that weekend. This wasn't revenge out of anger. That would have been easy. This was revenge born from survival, from 10 years of silence, of being erased. It wasn't about punishing them, it was about reminding them that I exist. I dressed in a plain black button-up, not to show up in person, but because I wanted to look put together when I FaceTime Rachel. She was already at the birthday dinner, seated at the far end of the table like an outsider. She'd agreed to go on one condition, that she record everything. At 7:24, she texted, "He's starting." Then at 7:28, they're bringing out a giant cake. Dad just stood up with a glass. I opened my laptop, clicked into the share drive folder I titled Inheritance Audit, and made sure everything was visible and time-stamped. Emails, voicemails, texts, copies of the trust, the letter from Mom, Nathan's smug voicemail, all of it. And then I waited. Rachel called me at 7:33. I answered immediately and saw her holding the camera low under the table. The video was shaky, but I could see the room, a backyard lit by string lights. Nathan at the head of a long outdoor table wearing a polo shirt and a fake grin. My parents standing on either side of him, beaming like politicians. My dad raised a glass. To Nathan, he said loud enough for the recording to catch everything, who's always been the rock of this family and who's finally ready to take on the responsibility of being homeowner of the family house. There were polite claps. My mother wiped a fake tear. Rachel slowly tilted the camera up. I saw Nathan smile and lift his own glass. I'm honored, he said. It's been a long journey, and I just want to thank Mom and Dad for trusting me with this legacy. We've already started the paperwork, so it's official. I smiled and nodded to myself. It was time. I texted Jordan one word now. Within 30 seconds, the cease and desist letter hit their lawyer's inbox with a high-importance flag. A copy also went to my parents' shared email, another to the county recorder's office to block any title transfers under the trust. But the final nail that came from the journalist. I opened the article draft one last time. The headline read, "The Invisible Heir Family Trust Dispute Reveals Ugly Battle Over Inheritance, Alleged Deception, and Legal Trickery." I clicked send on my statement. They erased me the day I turned 18. Now they'll never forget who I am. The article went live 5 minutes later. I knew they saw it within the hour, because by 8:45 my phone exploded. It started with Rachel's text, "Your mom just screamed. Your dad's on the phone yelling at someone. Nathan's face is white." Then Jordan emailed, "Just got word from the county. Title is frozen pending review. You're secure." Then silence for 2 full days. No calls, no knocks, no guilt trip letters, just silence until the fallout began. Monday morning, I got a call from Jordan. "They're pushing back," she said calmly. Nathan's lawyer responded, "But it's sloppy. They're claiming implied transfer rights, but the trust is airtight. This is exactly what we expected." What's our next step? We counter with evidence. Full documentation of your occupancy termination at 18, the inheritance clause, their attempts to coerce and misrepresent your position. It's not just civil court territory anymore. We may be talking criminal fraud. That word fraud felt like justice. It wasn't just that they tried to take the house. It was the fact that they'd planned it so carefully, assuming I wouldn't fight back, that I was still the weak one, the invisible one. But the truth was, they never bothered to check who I'd become. Over the next 2 weeks, the article picked up traction, not viral, but enough to stir some attention in our small town. A few neighbors reached out asking if I was okay. One even said, "Your dad always talked about how proud he was of his 2 sons. Didn't know they meant one." I didn't reply. Let the truth do the talking. Legally, the house was locked in a holding pattern. Any sale or title transfer was impossible without my signature. Their lawyers started backing off fast, especially when Jordan filed a formal report with the State Bar Association citing ethical violations in the attempted deed transfer without full heir consent. That got their attention. But the real fallout. It happened within the family. Word started to spread. Rachel told me that Aunt June confronted my parents at church and asked if the article was true, that she'd always wondered why I never came around anymore. That maybe they owed me more than a phone call. Then my cousin Will posted the article on Facebook with the caption, "Funny how some people forget who helped build the foundation when they're decorating the living room." One by one, the cracks deepened. My parents tried damage control. My mom sent a long email titled, "Our Side of the Story," claiming I was twisting facts, that they were just trying to do right by both sons. It was filled with passive-aggressive digs and fake apologies like, "We're sorry you feel wronged and you've always been too sensitive." I forwarded it to Jordan. She laughed and said, "This is gold. Keep everything." Then Nathan finally called me. I stared at the screen for a while before answering. He didn't say hello. He just said, "Why are you doing this?" I leaned back in my chair. "You mean defending what's mine? You're tearing the family apart." "No," I said, "I'm just refusing to let you steal from me." It was never about stealing. You lied to my landlord. You tried to take my lease. You forged paperwork. You went behind my back with the trust. What would you call it? He didn't answer, so I kept going. You let them throw me out when I was 18. You watched me disappear and never once asked if I was okay. And now you want to pretend like this was all just a big misunderstanding. I was a kid, he snapped. So was I. Difference is, I didn't have parents fighting for me. There was a long pause. Then quietly he said, "They're going to lose the house." I didn't say anything. Do you even care? I thought about that. About how many nights I spent wondering why I wasn't enough, about the times I'd rehearsed family conversations in my head just to feel sane, about the empty birthdays, the lonely holidays, the silence that swallowed my 20s whole. "No," I said finally. "I care that they remember why." A month later, the final paperwork came through. The house was to be sold. Per the trust, I would receive half of the proceeds, over $180,000. My parents would need to vacate within 90 days. Jordan handled the logistics. I never saw them in court, but I did get one last envelope. No return address. Inside was a photo of the house, the backyard, the table where Nathan had made his little speech, and scribbled in black ink across the top were the words, "Hope you're happy." I pinned it to my fridge, not as a trophy but as a reminder that silence doesn't mean weakness. That distance doesn't mean defeat, and that sometimes the best way to get the last word is to build a life where they don't get a say at all. And that's exactly what I did. At my birthday party, my sister smirked. "Maybe next year you'll actually have something to celebrate," while mocking my minimum wage job. So I blew out the candles and said, "Doesn't have to be next year, you'll find out soon enough."